Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into the elegant and, let's be honest, often messy world of market economics. We're going to look at how it's supposed to channel all our human ambition into making the stuff society needs, and, of course, what happens when that system goes haywire.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the promise, the beautiful theory of how a market works perfectly. Then we'll get into the problem, when it all falls apart. And we'll finish up by looking at the policy toolkit governments use to try and fix it.
Okay, let's dive right in. We're starting with the beautiful theory of the free market. This idea that the system, if you just leave it alone, can perfectly figure out where all our planet's scarce resources should go. To really get how that's supposed to work, we have to tackle a huge misconception about one of the market's main engines: profit. A lot of people see it as just greed, right? But in economics, it's way more than that. It's a vital piece of information. See, in economics, something called normal profit isn't about getting rich. It's basically the bare minimum you need to make to keep the lights on. Think about it this way. If you start a business, you don't just have to cover your rent and your staff's salaries. You also have to make at least what you could have been making at your next best option, like, say, the steady job you gave up. That's your opportunity cost. But when profits go above that normal level, you get what's called supernormal profit. And that sends a massive signal across the whole economy. It's like a giant flare shooting up, screaming, "Hey, over here! People really want more of this stuff." And here you can actually see this happening. Take the UK, for example. Look at the difference in the rate of return between services and manufacturing. As the services sector became way more profitable, what happened? Well, resources, we're talking money, talented people, you name it, they naturally started flowing away from manufacturing and towards services. So you see, profit isn't just a reward at the end, it's the director telling the economy where to go next. Okay, so if the system is so elegant, so self-correcting, then why do we see all these persistent problems? Like pollution, or why there aren't enough public parks, things the market just can't seem to fix on its own. This is where the beautiful theory crashes into reality. And this brings us right to the heart of the issue. Sometimes those price and profit signals that are supposed to guide everything, well, they get distorted. They're incomplete. Or sometimes they're just flat out wrong. And that leads to really bad outcomes for society as a whole. And, yep, there's a name for this. Economists call it market failure. And it's not a moral judgment, okay? It's a technical diagnosis. It just means the market, left to its own devices, isn't getting the best result. And this happens for a few really key reasons. So the number one cause is something called externalities. Think about it like this. You buy a coffee. That's a transaction between you and the coffee shop. Simple. But what about the single-use cup that ends up in a landfill? That's an external cost, a spillover effect that hits somebody else, but it wasn't included in the price you paid for the coffee. And this slide just lays it out so clearly. A factory owner, they're looking at their private costs, the stuff they actually have to write a check for, like labor and materials. But society has to bear the full social cost. That includes the private costs plus all those external costs, like, say, cleaning up the river that the factory just polluted.
So you've got your usual suspects for negative externalities: pollution, traffic jams, health issues from secondhand smoke. And because the producer isn't paying for these hidden social costs, the price of their product is artificially cheap. And what happens when things are too cheap? We make too much of them, and we use too much of them.
On the flip side, you've got positive externalities. When you get a vaccination, for instance, you're not just protecting yourself, you're making it safer for everyone around you. But because a vaccine maker can't charge every single person who benefits from that herd immunity, the market doesn't fully reward them for it. And that leads to underproduction of really good stuff, like education and research.
Okay, so besides those side effects, there's another major type of market failure. This one's about things that everyone can benefit from, whether they pay for them or not. We're talking about public goods.
So a true public good has two very specific features. First, it's non-rival, which just means me using it doesn't stop you from using it. Think about a radio broadcast. And second, it's non-excludable, which means once it's out there, you can't really stop anyone from getting the benefit. Think about national defense.
And this leads directly to what's called the free rider problem. I mean, think about it. If a private company built a lighthouse, how could they possibly force every ship that uses its light to pay up? They can't. So why would any company bother building it in the first place? They wouldn't. The market just won't provide it, even if it's a huge benefit to society.
So the market isn't perfect. We get it. There are these clear failures. The question is, what can you do about it? Well, this is where governments tend to step in, not to take over the market, but to try and fix it.
Now, the main goal here isn't for the government to start running everything. It's more about fixing those broken signals we talked about. The idea is to tweak the incentives so that what's good for a private company or an individual is also what's good for society as a whole.
And this table here basically lays out the government's toolkit. For each problem, there's a specific tool. Got a negative externality like pollution? You can use a tax, like a carbon tax, to make polluters pay that social cost. Got a positive externality like education? You can use a subsidy, like university grants, to encourage more of it. A company getting too powerful, like a monopoly? You can use regulation to control its prices.
But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? This is where it all gets really complicated. Using these tools isn't always easy or successful. Sometimes the cure can be as bad as the disease.
In fact, sometimes the intervention itself just makes things worse. And, yep, you guessed it, economists have a term for this too. It's called government failure. This is what happens when the government policy is so clumsy or has so many unintended consequences that we actually end up worse off than if we just left the original market failure alone.
And that really leaves us with the central tightrope walk of modern economics. The debate isn't really about markets versus government anymore. It's about finding that incredibly delicate balance between the two. It's about knowing when to let the market work its magic, when to step in and give it a nudge, and, crucially, figuring out how to do that without accidentally making everything worse.